The oak tree, such a noble tree that grows so mighty and so strong, and one with a fascinating social history infused in folklore. Today we will look at just some of the folklore of this iconic tree, so important to so many countries and cultures. The mighty oak, revered and loved in many countries around the world, too many for me to mention in this episode, but this is a tree so infused in folklore, social lore, and practical human lives surround the tree, a companion in our homes, our faiths, and our symbolism. I think everybody must love an oak tree. Their wide open canopies of pretty leaves, in spring the flowers are pendulous catkins. Male and female flowers both grow on the oak. As summer turns to autumn, acorns appear. These are loved things, animals and trees and birds and people collecting them. And the trees themselves are individual habitats in their vastness. Whole worlds live in just one great oak, supporting not just animals and birds, but insects, spiders, fungi and lichen. It is probably one of the most recognised trees of the countryside, and today we will look at some of the European folklore and tales of this countryside beauty. Celts, Slavs, Romans, Greeks, Norse, just some of the people that have venerated the oak and told tales of its nobility. And in each it is the most high gods that is worshipped that has the oak association. Just as each of these high gods has the power of lightning and thunder, so the oak, with its high water content and often the highest point in a bleak landscape, has a natural association with thunderstorms and lightning strikes. It is, after all, the tree most hit by lightning of all of our tree friends. The oak is loved, considered the king of the forest, a holy sacred tree allied to many gods and goddesses, including the Dagda, the Green Man, Janus, Diana, Cybele, Hecate and Pan. A tree of steadfastness, strength, magic, ancient secrets and endurance, generosity, protection, justice, nobility, honesty and bravery. In some lore, considered to be the tree of life with its deep root reaching into the ground, connecting to the underworld, the human world and the god and goddess heavenly realms. In Sanskrit, the oak is the door, from which we also get the word door, a thing that opens to reveal what is beyond, connects places and people, and thus with the oak also as the tree of life, connecting all realms, and a gateway to magic. The origin of the name of oak comes from Anglo-Saxon ac. However, similar to Sanskrit, the Proto-Celtic people named the oak Daru and Derwa, and from this came the Irish Dare, the Welsh Dar or Derwen, Scottish Gaelic Darach, Manx Dara, Cornish Derwen and Breton Derven. To this day there are remnants of these early names held in place names such as Glacdarach, Oak Hollow in Glenafric. In Ireland, which was once covered in oak trees, we have the names derived from Dare, Derry, Derryland, Derrybourne, Derry Kean, Londonderry, which was once Derry Calga, named for a fierce local warrior. And from all of these Celtic derivations of Daru, we also gain the word Druid. It is a widely held belief that the word Druid comes from the name of oak in Celtic language. The Druid holy people's practices were associated with forests, woodlands, sacred groves of trees, and most importantly for us now, oak trees and oak woodland. Most of northern Europe was once covered by a great forest, and much of this would have been oak, and so it is not surprising that to our ancient forebears the forests of oak were places to be revered. From these trees came the wood for heat, light, tools, building. It is a strong wood, our companion for time immemorial, and so to accompany our Indo-European Daru, we have wid, meaning to know. It is therefore thought that Daru Wid became Druid. The people who knew the oak, the wise ones of the oak wood. To these early Celtic people of Europe, the oak was not just a practical life-helping thing, but also sacred, and these people considered the grove sacred, a place of worship. The echoes of this still today with us, with modern Druidism and pagan faith. What we do know for sure is that the Celts worshipped in sacred groves that they called Nemetan, and evidence from Ireland in particular has shown it was most likely oak groves. Now, here is an interesting thing. Where we lived was quite near the Cornwall-Devon border, a place studied and accepted as a place once covered by the Great Forest, and in our area were a huge amount of place names that included Nemetan, Nympton. Also, a huge amount of green men in the ancient churches, more than one would reasonably expect in such a small area. Where we lived was a wonderful little village called Broadwood Kelly, the Broadwood and Kelly my name, derived from the Cornish word for a grove of trees. So all of the area was noted in place names as a place of sacred groves of trees of part of a great forest. It is a wonderful thing that these memories and echoes are still with us to this day. For the Celtic Druids who had no written tales that we know of, it is a near miracle. It was Pliny the Elder, who had spent time living in Gaul during the 1st century, who wrote in 77 AD that the Druids, for so their magicians are called, held nothing more sacred than the mistletoe, and the tree that bears it, always supposing that tree to be the oak. But they chose groves formed of oaks for the sake of the tree alone, and they never perform any of their rites except in the presence of a branch of it, so that it seems probable that the priests themselves may derive their name from the Greek word for that tree. And he also wrote, "They hold nothing more sacred than the mistletoe and a tree from which it is growing, provided it is a hard timbered oak. Mistletoe is rare, and when found it is gathered with great ceremony, and particularly on the 6th day of the moon. The ritual is that 2 white bulls are brought, a white-clad priest climbs the oak tree and cuts the mistletoe with a golden sickle, and then they sacrifice the bulls and pray. This mistletoe growing on the oak was said to be the most powerful medicine, curing all poisons and allowing an infertile animal to reproduce." The mistletoe, that strange parasitic plant that we still consider a part of love magic, was so sacred to the Druids, thought to have been placed there by the lightning of the gods, in truth placed there in seed form by the beaks of birds, wiping sticky residue from the mistle berries, hence mistle thrushes. This sacred plant was collected by Druid priests, Pliny said with golden sickles, not so long after the new moon after winter solstice. Why we still love mistletoe to this day at modern Christmas time and Yule. Strabo, the Greek geographer and philosopher, also wrote of Galatian tribes living on Asia Minor, holding meetings in Druids, the Oak Grove Sanctuary. Maximus of Tyre, another Greek philosopher, described the Celts as worshipping Zeus, basically the god of thunder Taranis, symbolised as an oak tree. Other sources tell us the Druids of Gaul ate acorns to tell the future. In Buckinghamshire in the southeast of England stands a huge tree at Burnham Breeches. This tree is roughly 29 feet 9 metres, thought to be between 400 and 1,000 years in age, and known as the Druids' Oak. When the Romans invaded Britain and overthrew the Celts and the Druids, the Romans destroyed all the oak forests they could, chopping them down. We can only imagine today what land and the forests must have looked like before the devastation wrought by Roman invaders. The Druids, beside being priests, prophets and legislators, were also physicians. They were acquainted too with the means of producing trance and ecstasies, and as one of their chief medical appliances they made use of the mistletoe, which they gathered at appointed times with certain solemn ceremonies, and considered it a very special gift from heaven. This plant grew on the oak, the sacred tree of the Celts and the Druids, held in highest reverence of both priests and people, and regarded as divine. To this very day the Welsh call Prenawr the celestial tree, the mystic mistletoe which has no root and cannot grow, or prosper but by that same tree it clings to. The sacred oak itself was thought to possess certain magical properties in evoking the spirit of prophecy. Hence we find altars of the Druids were often erected beneath venerated oak tree in the sombre recesses of the sacred grove, and it was under the shadow of such trees that the ancient Germans offered up their holy sacrifices and their inspired bards made their prophetic utterances. The Greeks too had their prophetic oaks that delivered the oracles of Jupiter in the sacred groves of Dodona. Such honours famed Dodona's grove acquired as justly due to trees by heaven inspired, when once her oaks did fate's decrees reveal, and taught wise men truths future to foretell. The Irish Celtic people told that a strange creature called Trefulnig Treocha appeared one day at Tara, the ancient ceremonial site in County Meath, on the day Christ was crucified. He had come from the other world, bringing with him a branch upon which were acorns, apples, nuts and berries. He shook these to the ground, and the sacred trees from these were planted in the 5 parts of Ireland. From these grew the sacred trees that overlook the provinces until after Christianization. They were said to have all been blown down by a disapproving Christian wind in the 7th century. The oak was the great oak of Mugna that stood in southern Kildare, said to grow 900 bushels of acorns 3 times a year, and also red apples. After all, it was a tree from the other world. As the last acorn of this tree fell, so a new flower would appear, a reminder of life's cycle of death and rebirth. The tree was written of as Mugna's oak tree without blemish, whereon were mast and fruit. Its top was broad precisely as the great plain without. The oak tree represents courage, endurance and protection through faith. And this held true for the ancient people as well, who must have gained comfort from the steadfast oaks living nearby. The great god Dagda is represented by the oak, and as with the Dagda himself, the oak was the most protective and hospitable of trees, and more so towards the brave and the honest. The Celtic people held community as sacred. To be a liar, a coward, to be mean of spirit could mean exclusion from clan and community, the most dreadful punishment and the most feared in this time. And so the people valued care, hospitality and group respect above all. Another Celtic hero has a tale of the mighty oak, that of the hero Cuchullain. The tale is told of the feast of Bricrew. Cuchullain was at the feast along with 2 more famous warriors. All 3 were guarding the settlement of Curroy in turns. During their watches 2 of the warriors fall, and during Cuchullain's own watch a giant of a man, a great warrior, attacks the settlement, huge branches of oak being thrown by this stranger at our hero. Not one to take this lightly, Cuchullain battles this warrior and defeats him. Later it is revealed that this giant of a man was actually Curroy himself, whose other name was MacDare, son of Oak Tree. During the tale, Curroy challenges Cuchullain to behead him, and in turn be beheaded. This is surely the root of the tale of Gawain and the Green Knight of Arthurian legend, and also harks back to the ritual sacrifice of an old king in the oak grove of Nemi, spoken in the Golden Bough by Fraser. It is written that this sacrificial event took place at Nemi at summer solstice, a link to the Oak King and the Holly King legend, of which we will speak of later. In Celtic Wales, the story of Welsh hero Math, son of Maddonwy, involves a sacrificial oak. The hero Llw is killed after a great betrayal, and yet on his death he returns as a great eagle that perches on top of a huge oak tree growing within the plain. Here he suffered 90 hardships, says this tale. And this is so similar to the story of Odin and his suffering at the ash tree Yggdrasil, both legends with a meaning of life's cycle, death and rebirth, and that we must honour this in order for springtime to return. There is an oak grove, Enemeton, near Loch Sant on the Isle of Skye in Scotland that was so revered for its sacredness and power that not one single twig would be harmed for fear of deadly repercussions. And on the sacred isle that sits in the middle of Loch Marie, a place I spoke of in my alphabet of fairies letter M, there stands a sacred oak. This island was once Isla Mori, the island of the great king who was a pagan god. The oak is also mentioned in the Norse sagas. It is the tree of Thor, and sacred to Donar also, and the acorn sacred to Freya with her connection to pigs being fed off fallen acorns, and the pig was a vital animal in ancient times for a valuable source of protein, but also to rid the community of waste and produce manure for the fields. In the Volsunga, King Volsung was told of having had an excellent palace built in this fashion. A huge tree with its trunk in the hall and its branches with fair blossoms stretched out through the roof, and they called the tree Barnskottr. Of course, this tree was a huge oak. The tree features in another part of the saga also. King Volsung's daughter Signy marries King Siggeir. At their wedding feast at Volsung's great hall, large fires are built and lit the whole length of the hall. In the centre of this place stands mighty Barnskottr. During the night, the visitors and revellers came close by the fires to be warm and share stories and rest. A stranger enters, a tall man with only one eye, barefoot and wearing a hooded cape and linen breeches tied around his legs. This man holds his sword aloft and approaches Barnskottr, his head hanging low with grey hair flowing. He lifts the sword and plunges it deep into the heart of the oak, all the way down to the hilt. The crowd in the hall is speechless, because they had not realised that of course this is a visit from Odin himself. The stranger tells them that whoever can remove the sword from the tree will have it as a gift, and what a gift! There is no sword like it. And then the old man leaves them and the hall, and he disappears. Of course now one by one they rise to their feet and try to pull the sword from Barnskottr, and yet not one hero or warrior or great man can until Sigmund, the son of King Volsung, steps forward. With a deft hand he took the sword and drew it from the oak, as if nothing. The bridegroom, King Siggeir, is furious, raging that he could not remove the sword himself. It is theorised that his rage comes from the fact that Barnskottr was obviously the garden tree of the Volsung family, the oak and its huge trunk and branches, a symbol of the fertility and luck of that family. The luck of a family in those days being the raising of children, sons to carry the names and stories into the future. At his bridal feast, Siggeir should have been able to pull the sword from the tree, taking possession of the luck of the family and bringing fertility and sons. Yet he could not pull the sword free. He was insulted and humiliated in front of his guests, and yet of course this tree was Volsung's, not his, and so it seems natural that the heir of Volsung should gain the sword. Of course this story also has echoes in Arthurian legend of the drawing of the sword from the stone by the young Arthur, and Hilda Ellis Davison, expert on the sagas, bring forth the idea that this tale links to the marriage custom of pre-Christian Germanic community which held sword and oak rituals. The groom-to-be would carry a sword, a phallic symbol of fertility. In many Nordic European ceremonies the sword would be stabbed into the roof beam, which would traditionally be of oak, for luck. The luck being represented by the depth of the scar on the beam. Ancient Greece and Rome also revered the oak as a spiritual, powerful tree. The Dodona oak was a tree of oracles and prophecy. The Greek Seloi priests and priestesses at Dodona, sacred to Zeus, would listen to the sighs of the winds as they passed through the leaves and the branches, the breath of the wind that the god Zeus, who told them of his judgments this way. It was said that a branch from this sacred tree was used in the building of the ship the Argo. The legends of Jason and the Argonauts still fascinate us to this day. Zeus used this sacred wood to communicate with the crew, to warn them of impending danger. In Arcadia, an oak branch harvested for the purpose was dipped into a spring sacred to Zeus to bring much-needed rain. In Lycia, during drought, the priests would take oak branches and touch them to the waters of the sacred fountain of Hago. A mist was said to arise, forming clouds that brought rain. At Plataea there stood an oak grove and forest where Diadala was celebrated. Here they would place cooked meats in the boughs of the oak trees and watch to see where the first bird would land to eat. This tree would be the one sacrificed, cut down and carved into an image of the bride, which was used in processions dedicated to the goddess Hera. The Romans adopted these beliefs. Zeus became known as Jupiter, and the oaks were revered with all of their magnificent symbolism. Roman commanders wore crowns of oak leaves after success, after many battles, and crowns of oak leaves were given as gifts for the victorious in great parades. Even today, the symbolism of this aspect of the oak history is used, the oak and the acorns still being used as decorations of military success. The oak was used in a ritual honouring the marriage of Juno and Jupiter each year in the oak groves, and worshippers and revellers would wear oak crowns. Happily, during the Christianization of Europe, the respect for the oak did not wane, despite earlier Christians ripping up many oak groves, demolishing ancient places of worship. St. Brendan, said to have made the great voyage from Ireland to the New World of the Americas, understood the properties of the value of oak. Instead of hides being used to line his coracle boat, he formed planks of oak instead. Where oak sacred groves stood, many Christian places of worship were built, carrying on a place of worship already recognised as sacred and easier to convert the pagan folk of the lands. St. Bridget founded her abbey at Kildare, their name coming from Kildara, Church of the Oak. In her legend it is told, she loved a great oak tree, there so much she would not allow one leaf to be harmed, and beneath it she built a place to live and worship. And for anyone who knows pre-Christian folklore, here is a tie to the goddess Breed, whose father was the sun god Dagda, who we have already learned was symbolised by the sacred oak tree. It was said that Saint Columba, also known as St. Columcille, was said to have been a Druid convert to Christianity, and he loved the oaks and felt great sadness at their destruction. The oaks that were felled from the oak woods of Mull were used to build his chapel at Iona, and here he lived under an oak tree. He also founded places of worship at Derry, once known as Dor, and at Duro-Dermag, the plain of the oaks. There is a strange tale of a man who took some of the bark of St. Columbus's tree to tan the leather of his shoes. The man became a victim of leprosy as a punishment. In another tale of Columba, he burned down the town of Derry and the king's fort there. In his mind, this was a sanctification of the land where he would build his church. However, the fire raged out of control, and he had to invoke a blessing to save a nearby grove of oak trees that he loved. He loved them so much, in fact, that on building the church, he had the direction changed so as not to harm the oaks. The oratory standing north to south, instead of east-west. He gave orders that during his life and on his passing, any successor should not touch any fell oak tree for 9 days, but to leave it. And then after this time of 9 days, a number sacred to the pre-Christian Celts, they could chop it for wood and share it with the poor of the community. When close to death, and living on Iona now, He was even said to have spoken that he feared the sound of an axe hitting an oak in Derry more than his approaching death. During early Christianity, larger oaks became known as holy oaks. Echoes of these places are found in many place names in England to this day. Holy Oaks in Leicestershire, Cressidge, once Crestac, or Christ's Oak in Shropshire. Many towns over a certain age will have an area called Gospel Oak, a nod to the once holy oak and a parish boundary marker. At Rogatiantide on the 25th of April, parishioners would circle the boundaries of the parish in what is known as beating the bounds, and after this they would gather under the holy Gospel Oak to be blessed and to attend service. The oak is a symbol of royalty, a kingly tree, the lord of the forest, and of course, in history the kings and queens believed in their God-given right to rule. They were God's representative on earth, and so as connected to the gods had the responsibility to provide not just physically, but also spiritually, keeping the land fertile and being an aid in battle, protectors and providers. The oak leaf symbol was used in royal crowns, a connection to these high gods. After his defeat at the hands of the Roundheads in the English Civil War of the 1600s, King Charles II took refuge in a great oak tree to avoid capture and death. Upon the restoration of the English monarchy to the throne on the 29th of May 1660, Charles declared this day, which also happened to be his birthday, Royal Oak Day, and also Oak Apple Day. From that day forwards, festivities were held where revellers would wear bunches of oak apples, twigs and leaves on their lapels and tucked into their hats. Their horses' bridles were even decorated with oak garlands. The connection to the ancient pagan May Day festival is obvious. May is also a time of the oak. During the Puritan era between the monarchies of England, May Day had been banned outright because of its pagan and sexual connotation. On the return of the king, so came the return of the celebration of the oak and all that it stands for. In Bromyard in Herefordshire it was recorded in an interview in the early 1900s that Royal Oak Day was considered true May Day, when maypoles would decorate all the main highway of Sheep Street, decorated with oak boughs and flowers, the people dancing around the maypoles also wearing oak leaves. In Castleton in Derbyshire, the Garland King rides through streets on Oak Apple Day, covered head to foot in cones of flowers, which are then removed from the king and placed in the church. In Scotland, the Hay family had an ancient connection to the famous Oak of Errol, their guardian tree. In the 1800s, a member of this ancient dynasty recorded how a sprig of mistletoe would be cut by one of the Hay family from this tree on All Hallowmas Eve, always with a new dirk, the Scottish dagger. This person would then round the tree 3 times sunways and a sacred spell spoken. This ritual dates back into time immemorial, a spell against witches and an aid to the clan in battle. The royal clan of Scotland, the Stuarts, have the oak as one of their clan symbols. In Perthshire in Scotland, near Dunkeld, can be found the Burnham Oak, mentioned in Shakespeare's Macbeth. Fear not till Burnham Wood do come to Dunsinane. This tree is said to be the last of a great forest, a mere echo of a once great stretch of mighty trees. The folklore of the oak is much and has many tales, unsurprising as these trees are often found solitary and huge in the landscape, and because of this certain of these special trees have become a magnet for folk tales, such as in the belief of the gospel oak we learned about in Christian folklore. These huge oaks would provide a natural sacred canopy for worshippers who were gathered beneath. In Somerset, close to Glastonbury, there are 2 extremely old and massive oaks known as Gog and Magog, the names of the 2 last giants who roamed Britain, killed by the invading Roman Brutus and his men. It is believed these 2 trees are all that is left of a once great oak-lined processionary way leading to Glastonbury Tor. In Nottingham in Sherwood Forest, the legendary haunt of Robin Hood, stands the major oak, a huge beast of a tree thought to be 800 years old, with a circumference of 33 foot or 10 metres. so huge that its branches are now supported by steel supports. Here the band of friends and heroes would meet and plan their next raids and plots. Although was it? As the age of the tree is thought only to date to the 1500s, so was there another oak there before the great tree? In Leicestershire there are the topless oaks in Bradgate Park. The legend behind these trees is tragic. In 1554, Lady Jane Grey, the poor unfortunate young woman whose ambitious family had claimed the throne on her behalf and became a rival to Elizabeth, who became Elizabeth I, was put to death by beheading. Lady Jane Grey had no chance, used as a pawn by her family, caught up in the succession of the monarchy of England after the death of Henry VIII. On her death, the oaks of Bradgate Park had all their branches removed in her memory, a symbol of deep mourning in a place close by her childhood home. It is interesting that so many countries consider the oak attached to lightning and thunderstorms and therefore rainfall. To this day there is a poem, Irish in origin but well travelled around the world. If the oak before the ash, then we'll only have a splash. If the ash before the oak, then we'll surely have a soak. In some parts of the countryside it was believed that to walk around an oak and wishing illness away would bring its blessing and magic upon the sufferer. The very first bird to land in the tree and fly away would take with it the pain and the suffering. In Wales it was said that to rub one's left palm on the oak's bark on Midsummer Day would prevent illness all the year round, and in an aid to stop ageing we should wear acorns around our necks. Toothache sufferers would bang nails into oak tree trunks to pass their pain into the oak. The writer John Evelyn wrote in the 1600s that any unmarried, soon-to-be mother, who gave birth beneath the boughs of an oak tree would not be scorned by the church, the magistrate or the people. In the southwest of England, a piece of oak was used as a Yule log. The log would be kept safe all year to be burned the following Yule, bringing the oak's blessings. To this very day we still bring mistletoe collected from the oak into our homes at Christmas and Yule. Kisses are given and asked for beneath it, a basic love spell. But this is so obviously has such an ancient root. In spellcraft, oak was often used as part of the potions to protect authority or to increase power as a leader. Oak bark from one tree was peeled by young women in Surrey for love potions to the point that so many bits of bark were taken there was huge damage to the tree and railings had to be placed to protect it. To prevent illness and bring increased fertility and youthfulness, one should carry an acorn in the pocket. This would also help with bringing a long life, and planting an acorn at the new moon would attract wealth and fortune. Placing one on the window protected homes from lightning strikes, as we have already learned. Try and catch a falling oak leaf, and this will stop you catching colds all the long winter. However, should someone in the house become poorly, the family should burn an oak fire. Keep it warm with oak as long as the smoke will draw away the illness. Should you dream that you are resting beneath an oak tree, this symbolises that you will have success and fortune and have a long, healthy life. Yet, should you climb the tree, this symbolises a close relative will have a hard time coming in the near future. Dreams of fallen oaks comes with the prediction of lost love. In the countryside, families would announce the deaths of fallen family members to the closest oak tree to bring better luck to the family over the coming year. And should you need to cut down an oak, something not to be lightly done at all, it should only be done during the waning moon and only when the wind is coming from a northern direction. In the ancient days, oak trees and acorns were especially valued as a free food for pigs. And these animals were a valuable source of food for the poor. It seemed everybody raised pigs, even the fairies loved pigs. These animals would be driven into the woodlands to snuffle around and search for acorns which they absolutely adore. This was an invaluable help for the peasant people who lived day to day working hard, and each meal had to have as much nutrient as possible. Nothing was wasted. It is interesting also that pigs are valued by the fairy folk as part of husbandry. A lovely protective talisman for your home is to gather some oak twigs and bind them together with red twine or thread in the shape of a solar cross or pentagram, and this will bring protection. Ogham is a strange language, written as lines against and across a central long line. Its origins still mysterious, but thought to be a very early form of written Irish. It is the language of trees. Each letter symbolises a particular species of tree, and all of the magic and power that it holds. In Ogham, the seventh consonant is oak, the door. Of course, oak is one of the trees whose wood has helped us over our human evolution into society, and its wood is still valued to this day, a strong and durable thing, and so used way back into history for house building, shipbuilding, places of worship and the carving of decorations, for practical items in the home too. The bark is full of tannin and has always been used to tan leather hides, curing them to perfection. The dye is a rich brown in colour, gained from the bark and the galls that grow on the oaks, and these give a strong black dye that was used as ink. Tonics were made for soothing the sores of horses from the bark, the horse being one of the most valued animals, and so very special care was taken of them. Even the sawdust has uses, still used today for smoking good meat and fish, and the wood for making charcoal. Country folk, poor with no access to medicine but with a keen knowledge of herbal remedies, valued oak immensely. Herbalists gathered the mosses and the plants that grew on the oaks, as its power would transfer even to these little plants that lived high in its huge branches or between the roots. The tannin from soaked oak bark in a small amount of water was used to help relieve small blisters, and in the United States a cure for frostbite was gained by collecting oak leaves that had stayed on the tree throughout the winter. These were then boiled in water to create a strong liquid used to soak the frostbitten areas for an hour every day for a number of weeks. The bark is the healing part of the oak. It has a strong astringence. Medicines derived from the oak bark are used to fight dysentery, diarrhoea, hemorrhoids, swollen gums, wounds and eczema. There was always a wariness of felling oaks, despite them being used for so many buildings and ships. It was known that oaks would avenge the felling of their fellow trees. Country folk avoided oak woodlands where the trees had been pollarded or coppiced for fear of being victim of the oak power. In 1945, writer Ruth Tongue recorded that her chauffeur refused to even drive past a particular oak grove that was cut down during the Second World War. There was also a tale told of a family named Karma, whose family were a greedy lot, deciding not just to take what they needed by coppicing the oaks nearby the home, but take all the branches regardless. The trees were dead still as the men felled the mighty oaks, watching silently. Not even a leaf moved. In anger they released their power, and one of these mighty trees dropped one of its own branches onto the farmer and his eldest son, killing both instantly. The youngest son rushed to their aid, but the trees began to shake so violently that he fled in terror. This son always had respect for the trees after that, and always asked permission before taking anything of theirs. He would even ask permission to pass the huge oak that stood by the gate if he might enter the woodland. This son of theirs inherited all the farm and never once had problems with the oak after showing respect. Oak as a wood for furniture has been a favourite for as long as we can go back in history, and there are some curious variations of this very versatile wood. Brown oak is wood with beautiful markings caused by the growth of beefsteak fungus on the living tree. Bog oak has a dark, almost black colouring caused by the wood being lain in ancient bogs since prehistory. The oak wood would be used for many items around the house and farm, and many of these things had a symbolism and extra form of protection. The tops of gate posts, the ends of curtain poles and such would have acorn shapes carved as decoration to ward off lightning strike and also attract the blessings of the oak and protection against evil spirits who just might creep through the vulnerable entry points into the home. The great love of oak for furniture, house building and internal panelling decorations in Elizabethan homes led to a massive decline in oak forests during this era. Another loss of oaks had been the felling of oaks for shipbuilding during the Middle Ages and the reign of Elizabeth's father, Henry VIII. This was a favoured wood for building fleets of ships for battle, and the rate of shipbuilding was unprecedented during these times. The Mary Rose, for example, the pride of the fleet of Henry VIII, was almost totally built from oak. Roughly 600 trees supplied the wood for her construction alone. The Mary Rose was discovered in a sunken state in 1971 and was raised in 1982, a groundbreaking effort of maritime archaeology and salvage. Her preserved remains and the findings found along with her can be seen at Portsmouth Historic Dockyard Museum in southern England. And of course there was a darker use for the oaks in bygone times, the building of the gallows. Oaks were often planted high on hills, able to be seen for miles around, and these stands of trees were often used as natural gallows. The legacy of these ominous places are we found today, because how many of us have seen the place name Gallows Hill in England? There were many superstitions about oak trees and fairies. To prevent the snatching of children and the leaving of changelings, small sprays of oak would be gathered and placed in the cribs. Places in the oak trees where holes had formed from fallen branches were and are still now today fairy doors, and if you want to call the fairy folk, you should gently rub a hand on the hole and let them know you are there. But this must only be done with the very greatest respect, to ask for their help, to give them your honour, and always leave a gift of a lock of hair or a little cream as a thank you. There is a wonderful piece of prophecy written about the Scottish Hay family that we spoke of earlier and their strong connection to the oak, and it is believed this was written by the fairies' favourite bard, Thomas the Rhymer himself. When the mistletoe bats on Errol's ache, and that ache stands best, the hays shall flourish and their good grey hawk shall not flinch before the blast. But when the root of the ache decays, and the mistletoe dwines on its withered breast, the grass shall grow on Errol's hearthstone, and the corby rook croak in the falcon's nest. Folklorist Ruth Tongue collected a tale from Somerset about an oak tree that helped a young girl escape the clutches of the cruel and mad king. An oak tree killed a king by dropping one of his branches onto the tyrant's head. As a punishment, the king's men gathered to chop down the oak and did not return. Oh, they rode in the wood where the oaken tree stood, to cut down the tree, the oaken tree. Then the tree gave a groan and summoned his own, for the trees closed about and they never got out of the wood of the wonderful wood. Another story from Ruth Tongue from the same source material is the Vixen and the Oakmen. In the folk tale, a vixen is in a desperate run to escape the hunters and snarling hounds. The oak tree spirits come to her aid, hiding her as they will protect all the beasts of the forest. Once the hunters had gone, the oakmen, the fairy spirits of the woodland, invite the vixen to come from her hiding place and bathe her torn and swollen paws in their healing oak tree rain pool. She does this, and all her wounds on her paws are healed, and the fur grows back where the hounds had torn her flesh. The animus spirits of the oak was present at the death of one of the trees, as documented by John Aubrey in the 1600s. He told that when an oak is falling, before it falls, it gives a kind of shriek or groans that may be heard a mile off, as if it were the genus of the oak lamenting. E. Wilde Esquire had heard it several times. In Derbyshire, as late as the 1800s, there was said to be an oak tree that was part human. This was a great tree full of mistletoe. If its branches were cut, it would scream, bleed, and give prophecies of doom in a terrifying voice. He also recorded that mistletoe gathered from one tree and then sold in London to various apothecaries had their revenge, as all of these men met with strange deaths. One fell lamb shortly thereafter. Soon after, each of the others lost an eye, and he that felled the tree, though warned of these misfortunes of the other man, would, notwithstanding, adventure to it, and shortly afterwards broke his leg, as if the Hamadryads had resolved to take an ample revenge for the injury done to their venerable and sacred oak. So it does not pay to anger the oak tree spirits and fairy folk. In the beautiful area of the New Forest in southern England, a rhyme still used today in parts of the country originated: "Turn your cloaks, for fairy folks are in old oaks." Of course, anyone who has listened to my Pixie-led and Dartmoor tales or who knows some fairy lore will understand this rhyme. To escape the clutches and temptations of the fairy folk, the easiest thing to do is turn some of your clothing inside out, or even pull out your pockets. At Herne's Oak in Windsor Great Park in London, fairies were known to gather and dance around this great tree. Of course, Herne the Hunter himself is a great folklore character, and one I will probably include in an episode of London Folklore in future. In the same vein as this, there was a belief in many parts of the country that to be able to see fairies, humans could also dance around the oak trees, and this would bring forth the secreted oak tree spirits and the fairies that live in the tree. There was a strange tale told to the Reverend MacLachlan from a man in Edinburgh in Scotland in the 1800s of a mythical old man. This man was enclosed in an oak tree that grew in the court garden of the king. One day the prince was playing ball and the ball hit the oak tree and rolled into a gap in the trunk. The old man in the tree asked the prince to fetch an axe and he would exchange it for the ball. The prince ran off and returned with an axe, which the man used to chop his way from the centre of the tree. On his freedom he emerged as Bodahn na Creamore, and he gave the boy gifts of great power and great valour. As he grew older, the prince decided to set off an adventure with his cook, a red-haired man. This man betrayed the prince and impersonated him, taking his identity and leaving the prince with nothing. The prince shared the lodgings of a swineherd, and little by little he regained the truth of his status as the true prince. With the help of the magic of the oak tree man, he overcame a boar, a bull, and a stallion. He won the hand and the love of a king's daughter of that land, and the red-haired cook was burnt to death in punishment. It was John Francis Campbell who retold this tale in his book of Highland folklore in the 1800s, and came to the conclusion after speaking to many about the Oakman traditions that swine, acorns and oak trees are very often tied together in the folklore. He supposed that the mythical and magical old men and deeds of brave men whose legends would pass down in shared stories, that these legends had echoes of the Druids to whom the oak was a sacred tree. He noted the tales of Grugach, the long-haired one, was the memory of most powerful Druids and their proficiency in magical art and the teaching of secret ways. Mrs. McTavish in 1859 on the Isle of Islay was recorded as telling that many a lonely island in the far west of Scotland had their brownie goblins who were kept friendly with bowls of milk, and it was believed that these too were memories of the Druids who, as their power had diminished, fled to the isles where gifts of food and milk left out were taken over time, and after so many hundreds of years the Druids died out, but in the folklore they became the fairy creatures remembered for magic. The legend of the Oak King and the Holly King is a wonderful piece of folklore that tells of the turning cycle of the year and the changing seasons. These mythical beings personify winter and summer. They battle through the year, endlessly fighting for dominance of the land and the people and the creatures. At spring equinox, the Oak King wings the battle and rules all of the warmer months of plenty, harvest, fruitfulness and long days. At midsummer he is at his strongest, and yet the battle must begin again, and at autumn-fall equinox he is killed and the Holly King wins, and it is he who reigns supreme over all while the earth and its floor are asleep in the cold and darker months. The fantastic folklore resource by the Irish government of collected superstitions and tales includes an oak folklore tale, supposedly true, and here is that recorded story. One morning, two men named John and Michael were going out to cut a big oak tree because its roots were spreading around the place and destroying the garden and the fields. When they were about to cut the tree, a voice which came from the roots called, "If you touch this tree, you will be dead before Christmas." But Michael wouldn't heed the voice, and he said it was only a voice singing. John said then, "I know well it is a fairy because I often heard my grandmother talk about an oak tree that was about here, and the fairies always dance around this tree every night from 12 o'clock until morning, and fairies multiply in their numbers very quickly, and a tree that fairies get into its roots spread and spread every year. "Well," says Michael, "I wouldn't believe the story." "Well, don't," says John, "but if you come with me here tomorrow night, we'll see if the story's true." But they should have went that night, because the fairies threw a charm over them and they could not sleep. When John and Michael had finished their supper the next night, it was 11:30, so they went to see the dance. And believe or believe it not, there were fairies by the score dancing, as far out as the roots of the trees reached. "Now," said John, "will you believe the story from this on?" "No," says Michael, "but if you are able to catch one and make him repent for what he said this morning to us when we were about to cut the tree here, I will believe." John went over very easy to a wee man with a long grey pointed beard and asked him to repent for what he had said, and asked him to get leave to cut the tree, and John and Michael felled it. But the fairies must have left the tree in a hurry, because one of the wee men lost his beard, and they forgot their dead owl, which they had for their supper. I want to leave this episode also with a beautiful poem by Sir George Bernard Shaw, simply named The Oak Tree. I took an acorn and put it in a pot. I then covered it with earth, not a lot. Great pleasure was mine watching it grow, the first budding green came ever so slow. I watered my plant twice a week. I knew I would transplant it down by the creek. One day it will be a giant oak, to shield me from the sun, a sheltering cloak. Lovers will carve their initials in the bark, an arrow through a heart they will leave their mark. It will shelter those caught in a fine summer's rain. Under its leafy boughs joys will be again. Creatures of the wilds will claim it for their own. Squirrels will reside there in their home. Birds will build nests and raise their young. They will sing melodies, a chorus well sung. Under its branches grass will grow. Here and there a wild flower its head will show. My oak tree for hundreds of years will live, perhaps the most important thing I had to give. Thank you, subscribers and supporters, for all your kind words, views, likes and follows. Some people have asked me how they can support the channel. Well, there are a few ways now. You can look at our merchandise shops where we have all sorts of great things with mine and Mark's art. And now you can even buy me a coffee on Ko-fi, where you can also join as a member of my page and get great principles of Mark's art and folklore things every month as a thank you from us both. I have put all of the links in the description of this episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Folklore of Trees, the Oak, and I am dedicating this episode to a dear friend and her brother. Strong, generous, steadfast and as eternal as the oak itself, ever will be. May the spirits of the oak bless you and protect you all. So until next time, dear friends, keep well, brightest of blessings, and remember, don't play with the fairy folk, or you may end up in one of my folk tales yourself.